Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast, where empathy meets action in the world of leadership. Your host, Gino Degregori, engages with innovators and seasoned professionals from diverse sectors, all demonstrating the power of leading with kindness. And now, your host, Gino Degregori.
Real change doesn't come from guilt or fear. It comes from leadership that people want to follow. Hi, I'm Gino Degregori, and welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast. Today's guest is Josh Dorfman, climate tech entrepreneur, media innovator, and sustainability strategist. He co-founded and still advises Plant D, building carbon negative material for the construction industry. He's the founder of Supercool, a media platform focused on climate solutions that are scaling now. Former Amazon leader and creator of The Lazy Environmentalist, which grew into a national media brand. And super excited to have you, Josh, here with us today and learn a lot more about, your background and looking at the sustainability part of the things. And I know we already started talking about that here a second ago, but I'm looking forward to going in a little deeper. So welcome to the show. And can you, give us your background?
Yeah, thank you so much, Gino. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk with you. And yeah, for me, my journey to, let's say, sustainability started going back almost decades. In the 1990s, as a young university graduate, I decided to move to Nanjing, China. Having grown up outside of the suburbs outside of New York City, I went to University of Pennsylvania as an undergrad, studied abroad in France while I was getting my degree in international relations. But post all that, I was like, I'm going to go to China because I think the relationship between China and the United States in the 21st century is going to come to define the 21st century. And it was really interesting because I would talk to my dad's friends, whoever, about my plans, and they'd be like, why are you going to China? Why don't you go somewhere that matters, like, Vietnam or and I'd be like, I have a hunch. But, in fairness, in 1993, 1994, it wasn't as obvious, of course, as what we see today. And so I was thinking, career, maybe CIA, State Department, I don't know. But if I can get over there and get a job and figure out a way to live there for a bit, I'll position myself for something cool to happen. That was really my mindset. And I went over, I was teaching English to graduate students on the Nanjing University of Science and Technology in 1995. It was absolutely fantastic, everything I hoped for. It was just really exciting to be there. I was trying to learn the language in country as quickly as I could and being tutored by, I think, a maid in the guest house where I was staying, where they kind of housed the foreigners, sort of kept them a little bit off to the side and got some of the folks working there to just tutor me, as quickly as I could. And then I got a part-time job working in a bicycle lock factory. Okay. At the time in China, everybody had a bike. So everybody is like a billion people. And this American company called Kryptonite at the time had the most, famous bicycle lock brand and lock in the world. That's stronger than Superman, right? Kryptonite. They opened their first factory in China randomly 20 minutes from where I was teaching and needed and wanted an American to show up on occasion to let the Chinese know, hey, we're actually paying attention, we're watching, do a little bit of quality control. And that became my job, which I was very excited about because it was also going to pay like $10 an hour. And when you're in a developing country, $10 an hour, you're suddenly like, holy cow, like I'm rich. What am I going to do with all this money? Right. So anyway, so I spent a lot of time in that factory, and I was also very excited about it because for me, it was another lens to understand the culture, understand the society. I was in this academic environment. Now I got to be in a business environment, in a manufacturing environment, just meet all these different types of people. And eventually I went to work for Kryptonite full time. We opened more factories in China. I was thinking this might actually be my future. I was like, whoa, I actually really like this business thing. And there are a billion people here riding bikes, and we do have the best bike lock in the world. Maybe I'm going to sell a bunch of bike locks here and retire by like the time I'm 30, which I tried and didn't do successfully, but learned a ton. I bring all that up to say, in my second year there, we opened a factory in southern China, and my Chinese by then was really good. So I'm traveling with the Chinese owner who we're partnering with. We get to this restaurant. Before we go in, we're in the parking lot, and there are all of these pretty plush Mercedes in the parking lot. Now, this is still communist China, 1997, right? And this is a lot of money from Hong Kong that's kind of spilled over. But he says to me, he goes, Josh, look, or he goes, shall do, because that was, my Chinese name, shall do. Look,
okay.
Or little do. My Chinese name was
okay.
Du Shunhua, which means like smooth Chinaman, which was totally accidental and kind of awesome. But he's like, shall do. Look, my Mercedes is the biggest Mercedes in the parking lot. And his chest swelled up with pride. And in that moment, some things clicked for me. I thought, wow, you're just like us. You want more, you want bigger, you want more lifestyle, you want more stuff, you want higher quality of life. And in 1997, America was exporting that to the world. It was really like, hey, Cold War's over, globalization, be like us, right? This is going to be good. Fast forward to today, we're not so psyched about that because countries like China are beating us in a lot of areas. But back then, it was like, yeah, more. And what I thought was, you know what? You want what we want. And there's 1.3 billion people in this country. And I'm seeing highways, tunnels, bridges being built so fast. Nobody wants a bike. Everybody wants a car here. There's going to be 1 billion car drivers. I don't know anything about global warming. I don't know anything about climate change. But how is that going to pencil? How are you going to fuel those cars? And then it became a question for me of global warming and what eventually as I started studying that. So I came back to the States. I went to business school. I got an MBA from a school called Thunderbird, which is a really interesting school out in Arizona that focuses on international business. It was started on an Air Force base after World War II, called Thunderbird by an admiral who knew that America was going to need executives to engage the world who could understand business, culture, and language. And so it was a wonderful place to be. And I was kind of going through the machinations of trying to figure out my career. Would I be a marketer? And I would do things like work on a case study, or in some course would be like, okay, how are we going to market like Colgate toothpaste in Saudi Arabia, right? And it's like, okay, that's interesting for 10 minutes. And then I couldn't help thinking, but we're in a climate crisis. Like, who cares? But I didn't know what to do with that. So eventually in 2004, I figured out what to do, which was to say, okay, I'm going to recognize I live in America. America's a consumer culture. I grew up in a town about an hour north of New York City, in Westchester County, a town called Armonk. When I was young, growing up, it was mostly a middle-class town, and then progressed and became kind of upper middle-class town. And my family, my parents ran their own business. They became better off, and we all like stuff. And so I thought, you know what? I'm not going to try and fight this system to change it. I'm going to try to help consumers consume more sustainably, offer them up really wonderful options to continue to pursue their high quality of life, but also do it in a way where what they're purchasing has a lower carbon impact and carbon footprint. That became my first company called Vivavi. It was like a modern sustainable furniture company. And since then, I've launched a lot of businesses. I've worked at Amazon, building a business called Vine.com. So it was a business unit of Amazon. It was like an online Whole Foods before Amazon just was like, you know what? Let's just go buy Whole Foods and to hell with this thing. And then ultimately, before Supercool, built this business called Planted, which I did with two incredible engineers from SpaceX, where we figured out a way to grow a grass that grows like 10 times faster than trees, has a really sturdy like biomass structure to it, so you can grow it, harvest it over and over again, really, really fast, pull carbon from the atmosphere, right, through photosynthesis, just like trees, but you're doing it 10 times faster. And you can farm it. So we work with farmers in North Carolina to grow it for us. And then slice it really thin, put a little bit of resin on it, run it through a press, which we built, first of its kind in America. And then 140 feet later, through like this whole line, out comes a 4-foot by 8-foot structural panel that replaces plywood, and also this thing called oriented strand board, which is when you build a house and you see these panels being nailed to the 2x4s, it's that. And so we pull all this carbon from the atmosphere. We built a machine that has no smokestack, so we don't give all that carbon emissions right back up into the atmosphere. And we got the largest home builder in America, D.R. Horton, to give us an order last year for 10 million of these panels, which is 90,000 or so houses. So this thing is kind of off to the races, and that's the type of stuff I do.
That's amazing. Congratulations, man. I love it. And it's like you're so passionate. I can feel the passion in your voice, right? And in the stories as it relates to, everything that you were doing in China all the way to what you're doing now. So congratulations. Thank you for joining us. And definitely I got a lot of questions that I want to pull some threads on here. But before we dive right in, the first question that I love asking my guests here is, what does being a kind leader mean to you?
A kind leader to me is someone who is very clear in their expectations and of what they want and need from their team, their employees, those who are either reporting into them or who they're responsible for. Very, very clear on that. And can even be like really like very disciplined and focused in terms of what you must do. And then also has the empathy to help people who they are responsible for get there, right? So recognizing like we may set some really tough goals. We might actually have like being a kind leader doesn't mean being soft. It means being really clear and then being really attuned and empathetic and understanding of what people on your team or who are reporting into you are going to need to actually meet the expectations you have for them. That to me is, that is about growth. And I see that as kind of what a kind leader does.
Great description. I love that. I mean, if I can summarize it, is really having clear expectations with that discipline and focus to help your team through that empathy that you have, right? Really understanding what they need to be successful. Because if you just say, hey, here's the goal, go do it without being clear and without having the support structure in there, it's not a win-win, right? It's not going to allow them to really grow and be that team that you want, right? Those folks that you want to be successful. So I love that. I mean, that's a great definition from your perspective. And I'm curious on your experience, your career, in China and in the States. Like, do you have any examples? I mean, because I am actually curious on the kind leadership, especially when it comes to foreign cultures. How was working in China? And did you feel like kind leadership was something that, or did you experience any of that? Or you did a lot of that while there? Or was it just totally different?
China was, I think in this regard, I was so young, in 23, 24, 25, just in this whirlwind experience that I don't know if those are the lessons in leadership I take from that time. What triggers for me though is I mentioned when I went to business school, when I was at Thunderbird, and Thunderbird's a wonderful school. They actually give you 5 years to graduate because they encourage you to go off and do more extended internships, and you can work and come back. It's really, really interesting program. So I worked in Paris for 6 months for a company called Delphi Auto Systems. And at the time, it was about a $30 billion auto parts manufacturer, like AC Delco spark plugs, things like, products like that. It had just actually spun out of General Motors. So it had been part of General Motors and it just kind of separated and was this big global auto parts maker. I went to work for the head of operations and production logistics for Europe, who was an American woman. And she'd risen through this industry, which is, I mean, honestly, especially if you think back, a couple of decades, really difficult for a female to get into the leadership position. She was tough. She was tough. So tough, she made men cry. And I saw it. And we had this European task force where we had the country managers who oversaw operations in 12 countries where Delphi had manufacturing facilities all over Europe. Every month, the European task force would convene. I was her intern, really kind of like this sort of glorified, like fly on the wall, who sometimes was asked to kind of present things and usually get scolded or told to sit down. Didn't meet necessarily her standard, but it was almost a toxic environment where these grown men were coming to Paris and just being like yelled at and scolded for not doing things, at the level they expected. And not that she was necessarily wrong, but this was the way that she was, quote unquote, leading this team. And so one Friday evening, I went to just say goodbye to her at the end of the week and knocked on her door and said, okay, I'll see you Monday. And she said to me, come in, close the door. And I was like, oh God, here it comes. I'm fired. I've only been here for 2 months. I got 4 months left. Like, she's about to let me go. And she's like, sit down. And I sit down and she starts talking. She says, I, and she's struggling to get out whatever she's going to say. And then she says, I am a terrible leader. And I was like, what is happening right now? And she's like, they all hate me. They don't like me. they don't respect me. I don't know how to talk to them. And it was cross-cultural, right? You had people from Austria to Spain to Portugal. I mean, it was cross-cultural.
Yeah.
But she laid bare all of this insecurity and feeling she had. Meanwhile, she's out there being and my head's spinning, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, well, what am I going to say to her? And what I said to her was, you're a very strong leader. You clearly, you have all of these incredible skill sets. One of the things that I think would be helpful is when you talk to the team, it's so much about, here's what I want, here's what I expect. It's about, you make it like very much about you.
Right.
Little shifts. Like, what if you started shifting some language to talk about what we can do, right? Like, here's where we're going. Like, we're all in this, right? Like, which is some understanding and some empathy and recognizing we are all in this. And she's like, well, what are you talking about? It was so foreign, but I did see her kind of evolve over a few months. And I think because I was just an intern and I was temporary and I was going to leave, it was safe for her to have these kinds of conversations with me. And so what I started to see was a person who started to actually evolve a little bit and become more kind in her leadership, which I think helped the team. I think it definitely helped her. And started to alleviate, all of that toxicity. I didn't really get much done because big corporation, it's hard to do anything in 6 months. But that I actually felt, I contributed in some way, and it helped me kind of conceive of how I wanted to be as a leader because of what I saw not working well and what I thought could, work better.
That made an impact for sure in your life and how you were seeing others around, right? Rather than being collaborative, I'm sure a lot of it was fear, right? How old were you, by the way?
So I was, let's see, it was right before, I was probably 27, I want to say. 27 or so.
Yeah. 20s. I mean, so, being able to experience that's amazing. And then also provide that feedback and not get it, not in trouble, but it's like, what are you talking about? Right. But I'm glad that impacted her life. So thank you for sharing. And I'm not sure if you go back and see how she's doing or not, but I hope she's doing much better though. But thank you for sharing. Now, those are the stories that it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter, where you are. It's like just the awareness. I think what I gather from that story is you were so aware of the situation and you had a different perspective to give that sometimes we're so blind in our own way and how we do things that we don't take a step back. But it's you were there at the right time for the right reasons for this individual to be able to see that perspective and expand on that. And so again, thanks for sharing that. But I love it because that's what this show is all about, right? Kind leadership. So I really appreciate the story. Going back to the sustainability, right? Like, what drove you to that passion? I think you mentioned a couple of things here, your intro, but like, what really was like, you know what? This is what I really want to do. Was there a moment in time, or was there an experience that you went through that really pushed you into doing this and focusing in that?
So I was born on the day that President Nixon opened China, like established formal relations between the United States and China. That was February 21st, 1972, the day I was born. When I started thinking about going to China when my senior year in college and got very interested in thinking about the future, I felt, it's just my sort of belief system. I was like, maybe this is fate, maybe this is destiny, but I'm supposed to go to this country. I now see that I was born on the day they opened. And I really have felt like one of my skill sets is being very, very good at bridging cultures, right? Being this, as we're talking about, as we talked about in that example in Paris, right? And so I felt I need to go to China. I'm going to play some role in diplomacy or something between these two countries. And so I felt kind of called to go. And then when I was there, as I described to you, in the moment where I was reflecting on the pace of development that you saw in China 20 years ago and has continued of a country that was really going from developing, right, to very modern highways, tunnels, bridges being built in a matter of months, unprecedented in all of history. How that civilization has transformed, and that country has transformed. And I felt like when I started seeing that, And as I said to you, like, oh my gosh, there's going to be 1 billion people driving cars here one day, not riding bikes. It was like I was being given a gift, and that gift was a glimpse of the future, which was visceral because I'd been living there for 2 years, right? And so now I'd felt called to be there, and here was this moment where I knew what the future was going to be. I knew that this is how this country was going to transform. And then you follow that logic, and for me, it was like, what does that mean in terms of how do we all raise our standards of living? China, India, Eastern Europe, everywhere on a finite planet with finite resources. How do you, how do you get that math to pencil? How does that work? And so it was these series of moments where I knew, like I said, when I went to business school and I'd work on a cool project, like, hey, let's go, I don't know, let's go market Levi's in Russia. Who knows? Sounds fun, but then it's like, but really, do they really need more jeans? Is that really like what the world needs? And and I would kept coming back to this thread of climate change, global warming. We have to do something about this. As I went through that realization of like, we have to do something about this, I went through a period of time when I came back to the States from China, going to grad school, getting my first jobs, where I was feeling so anxious now about the environment, so anxious as I was learning about climate change, and didn't know what to do with all that anxiety, which really made me more for a year or two, more like a kind of a scolding type climate activist, where I would get very upset with people if they were leaving the lights on. I would get very upset with my family for the cars they were driving. And it caught everybody totally by surprise because I was this very, I would say kind of normal kid. I played a lot of sports. I was just would never think about any of this stuff, and no one saw it coming. And what I came to realize was, if there was one pivotal moment, Gino, that just kind of really just brought it home. I had gone into a PhD program in 2002 at George Washington University, where I was going to study politics, the environment, and China. And I thought, now or never. I think I had turned 30 or something, and I was like, I'm either going to get this PhD and go try and be like Jack Ryan, and like save the world and have, be this like, or not. Now's the moment. So I went to this PhD program at George Washington, and then it was like January, and we're reading these books, which I don't really understand. They're by these very brilliant PhDs, which I can't really decipher. My brain just doesn't really think that way. And we're in this cold, drafty classroom. It's like a January wintry night in Washington, D.C. Where you live. And we're reading this book by the Stanford professor about like who rules the world in whatever way he's describing it. And I can't understand his writing because he's a really bad writer. And I'm just thinking like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Like, I'm 30 years old in this like classroom. Like, how did I get here? What am I doing? This is like, and I just thought, you know what? I am done with this. I'm done with thinking about the problem. I know what the problem is. The problem is like, we use a lot of fossil fuels, and we have to figure out ways to like live really well and not consume as much fossil fuels and shift our energy. That's it. So I'm out of here. And I did this really immature thing. I emailed all my professors. I was like, hey, family emergency. I'm not going to be coming to class for a few months. Although I did keep teaching because I was a teacher's assistant and needed a little bit of income to keep it going. And then I started writing my business plan for my first company. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to help consumers go green. That I'm going to launch my first company to do that. And now I'm on my way.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. That was really good. And there's just those moments where you go back and it's like, at that time, you're like, what am I going to do? And now you go back and thinking from now, it's like, that was perfect. That was clear. And that paved the way for where I am now and the things that I'm doing, and that the impact that you're making, right? You're educating, you're helping, you're working with companies to truly understand that whole sustainability, right? How can we use our resources much better? The one thing I was thinking as you were sharing the story, and you at one point you were getting a little upset because people are leaving the lights on and all that stuff. It's like, I feel a lot of times, at least for the last, when you start the global warming kind of thought was coming out. And even now it's like, it's really fear driven, meaning like, if you don't do this, in 10 years, however, the world's not going to exist. So it's going to be too warm and blah, blah, blah. Right. I don't know if you've thought about this, but from my perspective, going to a kind leadership mindset, if you go into a room and everybody's fearful about how you are talking about a topic, or you need to work together, right? Nobody's going to give you their best. Everybody's going to be fearful about, the situation, right? Coming back to the story you told me about, the lady, leading that and making people cry. I'm circling back to, is there a way to communicate that sustainability and using the resources in a more value-driven, positive perspective. Like if I do this, I'm not only going to gain something that I need for myself, but I'm also going to reduce the impact to the global. You see what I'm trying to say here? It's like, and I'm sure you've thought about it. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about that, and how are you guys, doing that right now?
It's what you're describing is absolutely the prevailing paradigm in which we live, right? Where when climate change comes up, you say climate change, everyone instantly feels bad, despair, lost cause, no one wants, right? Like it's just everything you associate with climate change is awful, right? And or boring or like not interested, all of that. And so I think that, there is a huge branding challenge, communication challenge, but fundamentally, if you're going to talk about solving climate change, you're always going to kind of lose that conversation because it's a negative frame. I think this is what you're saying, like, right? And no one responds to that. I mean, very few people respond to that. I respond to it, but I'm not normal. I'm nuts. But but like people are too busy. They've got other stuff to do, right? And it's like, here you come, you're going to hassle me with climate change. Like, dude, I am raising 2 kids. Like, I have bills to pay. Like, I've got a mortgage. Even if I cared, I don't have time to, right? I think what is most exciting to me today, and so when I stepped down as CEO from Planted, the building materials company we started to use grass instead of trees, right? And when I stepped down from that and was thinking last year, okay, what am I going to do next? Let me do some research. What other innovation is happening? Just to like the question you're asking, that's climate innovation that is reducing carbon emissions, but also making life better in the process, boosting profits for companies or making things more affordable. What's out there? And what hit me really fast was, oh my God, there is so much more happening today in 2024, 2025, and now moving into 2026 than anybody realizes in terms of the kinds of things we want that are actually make our lives better and also reduce our impact at the same time. And all the innovation to me that's really exciting is climate innovation. And I'll give you just one example. I talked to a company recently called Quilt. Quilt makes I don't know if you've ever seen like a ductless HVAC system, heating and cooling system for a home where you have like a mini split, right? And then you have a heat pump. So their system is really energy efficient. It's probably 3 or 4 times more energy efficient than what people would typically get in the house, which means you would use less energy. But what's really cool is they've built a system where when you go into a room, one, it already anticipates who's going to be in that room. It learns your behavior. And so it's already begun heating or cooling that space before you got there, which means you're going to save energy because it's happening much more gradually. They don't have to spike the system, right? They also know, of course, the temperature outside. They know the dew point. They know the humidity. So they know actually how to make that room more comfortable. And what Quilt did that's never been done before, they just did it 3 months ago. They actually, for all of their customers got better heating and cooling systems overnight because they did exactly what happens for electric cars. They did an over-the-air software update, which made the heating and air conditioning unit on the wall 20% more powerful without spending more money or doing anything else, right? And so if you are in the market for a new heating and cooling system, why wouldn't you get the one that can do the cool upgrades like an EV car that's just going to get better and better over time? Right? And so you're reducing your carbon emissions, you're reducing your energy bills, and you're getting a more comfortable home, right? I see that across everything. I see stoves today. Most chefs, or many chefs, are really coming around increasingly to wanting to cook on induction ranges over even a gas flame with natural gas. Like many of today's leading chefs like this induction range technology. If you want to get an induction range stove in your home, the challenge isn't so much the cost of the induction range. The challenge is that your house probably doesn't have the right voltage running to your kitchen. So you have to call an electrician, run new wires, right? You got to get a 220 amp running to your, and that can cost thousands and thousands of dollars, right? So here, like people are like, oh, this induction range is actually really awesome, but how can I get it? Because there's all this other cost. So this company called Copper recently launched an induction range that put a battery inside the bottom of the stove, right? Inside the unit. Now you can plug that stove into the same socket as your toaster or your juicer, right? Okay. And while you're not cooking, that battery charges up. And so when you're ready to cook, you've got all the energy you need for those, 3 or 4 times throughout the day or however many times where you want to cook. And it solves a massive problem. And now you have a battery, which means if the power goes out, you can cook. You can also probably keep the refrigerator running, right? You have this lifestyle enhancement. And so the good news about climate change is the solutions actually make life better almost across the board. And they're now scaling up. We're in this different moment. And that's why I started Supercool, this media company, because I go out and find those companies and tell their stories. On the one hand, so people discover them. And we do a lot of business to business stories too, different technologies that are helping businesses drive more profit, save money, do right by their customers. Not so much just for good news, but also to understand how are they doing it. And not necessarily not like how are you putting a battery in a stove? Like, okay, I could probably, if I'm technical, I could probably figure that out, right? But how are you selling it? How are you getting people to adopt it? How are you what's your playbook for actually driving change? And the copper thing is really interesting, that induction range, because in New York City and other municipalities increasingly, probably in Washington, D.C. Soon, if not there already, if you're going to upgrade a building and try to electrify buildings as codes are changing and they're kind of forcing more energy efficiency, one of the solutions is actually to move to induction range. But if you have to rip out all the wires in an older apartment building, right, to rewire, the cost is astronomical. Absolutely, but so copper, I think they just got an order for 10,000 of these units from either the state government or the city government in New York City to install them in older apartments that are now going to upgrade because the economics work really well. It's so fascinating what's happening today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those stories too, because that's what I was getting at. I was like, I think things are changing, right? There's still the concern, right, of global warming and all those things, but it's more to your point, it's how are we integrating those solutions into our everyday life? And I would think that even with the technology changing every day, every week, every month or whatever, right, including AI, I think it's going to exponentially continue to improve as we go into 2026 and beyond. Have you seen AI? I mean, you talked about Quilt, right, and the over the air, and I'm sure they're using a lot of that AI component to improve it, right? So you're seeing examples like that in other areas that is going to exponentially help and incorporate a lot of this in everybody's life?
It's hard for me today to think of a company that is succeeding. And I talk to I would say next generation or leading climate companies every week that is succeeding without using AI. It is so integrated into the solutions that companies use today. There is a company called Zoom, Z-U-M, which got its start, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, came to market in 2019. So they've been in market for 6 years. Zoom is solving a problem that has impacted almost everyone in America and no one ever thinks about. And that is the fact that kids riding school buses today, and by the way, school buses are actually the largest fleet of commercial fleet of any type in America. There's 500,000 school buses on the road every day. Kids in a school bus are having the exact same experience that their great-grandparents had 80 or 90 or 100 years ago. The yellow bus hasn't changed, right? And so when that yellow bus leaves the depot in the morning and heads out on the road to go pick up the kids, it is absolutely mind-boggling in the 21st century that nobody knows where it is. How is that possible? It's picking up the most precious cargo in America, and nobody knows where it is. Yeah. And so Zoom does kind of two sets of innovation. They've built software so that now whether it's the school district in Boston or in Richmond, Virginia, or Nashville or Dallas or LA or San Francisco, Seattle, they're all using it, 4,000 schools, really, really fast. They've built software where, of course, they know where the bus is, but parents can actually know where the bus is. So parents can be like, okay, is the bus on time? Is the bus going to be late? Oh, and Timmy's not going to school today. Let me open the app and just notify the driver and the system Timmy's not going. So the bus can reroute or not stop and idle for 3 minutes and just use all that diesel, right? And so let's optimize these routes. Let's gather all these data points. Let's use machine learning. Let's use AI to understand how to optimize. That's going to cut carbon emissions. That's going to get kids to school on time, right? Which is a local issue and a really big deal and happens all over the country, but it's so localized that nationally we don't even realize what a crisis it is. Kids doing the right thing by getting on the bus and still not getting to school when school starts is absolutely it's inexcusable, but that's the system we have. Then what Zoom did, and now they're getting ready to do this with city number 2. We just had a chat with them last week. They went to the city of Oakland in California. They said, okay, look, we've been able to optimize your school bus fleet. You have 136 diesel school buses, but you only need 74 to run your system because we've just optimized it. And now, because you only need 74, now we can take the next step with you, which is we are going to provide 74 electric buses to replace these 74 diesel buses. And we're going to set up a system with the utility where we will do all the charging, and it will be two-way. So if we've charged the battery and we have more energy than we need to run the school bus, we will sell that energy back to the grid to make this whole system more affordable, to keep prices and to make it better for the school district, right? And so now there's no diesel going through those communities. The communities are healthier. Kids are getting to school on time. And parents have the peace of mind, as do the school district, the administrators, of knowing where everyone is at all times. It's a win-win-win. It starts with that technology, right? It's like AI is integrated into informing that solution. Then it unlocks all this value. And I just see that playing out across every aspect of industry and the economy right now.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I'm sure you have a newsletter, don't you? How do you push out content?
We do. So we do a weekly podcast. We do the Supercool podcast where we're bringing on these companies like Zoom and Quilt and Copper and talking to their founders. And we did this really cool show recently with Amazon. We had 2 of their executives talking about and walking us through their playbook for how there's this really counterintuitive thing where the faster Amazon delivers, the lower the carbon emissions associated with the products that come to your house for how they run their logistics. It's like, wait, what? So you're like, we speed up and we get lower carbon. How's that possible? So like we'll dig in with Amazon. So we do a weekly podcast. We do a newsletter where we then go deeper and we're like, here's Amazon's playbook. And we really spell it out. So one, it's really interesting, but other operators, it's like, what's universal here that if you're working in business, what can you take away and apply in your business from what Amazon's doing? And then, YouTube, we've got 18,000, followers to our channel. That's growing pretty fast. We launched this course called the Climate Adoption Playbook, where we took the lessons I've learned over 2 decades, the patterns I kept hearing from 50 or 60 of these climate leaders. It's not how they build the innovation. I mean, we talk about that, but it's really like, how do you sell it? How do you get customers to say yes? Like and we put a course together, 8 modules, 20 case studies, takes a couple hours, and you learn, and you can get all the best learnings from the best companies in the world for how you can scale climate solutions faster into market so we can all win.
I love that, Josh. And I think that's the positive, things, right? Like I love that idea. I'm definitely going to sign up and follow and listen to your podcast for sure, because I geek out on this stuff too, and I don't know too much about the sustainability, to be honest, right? Being completely honest, but just this conversation alone got me super excited about the things that are that could happen, right? And the things that I could be doing on my business to kind of improve it. I was down in Orlando. I was in Disney, and they have electric buses now, or it was a Universal, I think one of those. And it's funny because the back of the bus, usually with a diesel, they have a big thing with the vent, right? Since this was an electric, they didn't need to have that vent, but they had that. And I was like, looking at it, there's no hole, there's no vent, but they made it look like an actual bus there for some reason. And you couldn't hear anything. It felt normal. But anyways, just wanted to share my experience of how things are changing for the better. And I'm excited to see what the next decades or 2 are going to bring with not only AI, but with everything people are doing and everything that you're doing to educate and bring to light some of those amazing innovations that other companies are providing to the people. So I see that as an amazing thing that you're doing. So thank you very much. As we're going to kind of our descent here, there's a flip the mic, which I ask all my guests to ask me a question. Is there a particular question you got for me?
Well, I'd be very curious to hear from your experience an example of where you've seen kind leadership in your life, or something maybe that influenced you to even start this type of podcast and have these kinds of conversations. I mean, maybe that's the question. What inspired you from your experience to do this?
Yeah, I think what's inspired me, not similar situation as you, but like I've experienced other people not being kind. And I won't name any names, but the more successful this person was getting, the worse they were treating people. And I was like, that's not how I want to do things, right? So that led me to, I don't want to be that. how can I shift that? How can I change that? And that was about 7, 8 years ago. I've always been blessed with people in my life that has advised me and always kind of gave me moral support as well as a sounding board in some of the things that I was doing. But about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, actually now, I decided to, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is where I want my company to be like. So I started doing a lot of self-reflection. It starts within. So I was like, what am I doing? Similar to like, why am I sitting in this cold room? It was more like, for me, it's like, do I really want to continue the other path, or do I want to make an impact in people's lives? That's how I saw it, right? Where's the value that I'm bringing? So I started working on myself, started meditating. I started doing a lot of great things that helped me truly understand my value to the world. Let's put it from that big, macro perspective. And he gave me just a different angle on how I want to be, not only help others, but how I want to be remembered in the future. Right? And I have 3 kids that they're also. My wife and I tell them, you can do whatever you want, be passionate in whatever path you want, but you got to be kind, right? Kind to others, and to your point, help, not only help and be soft, but is help, but also be disciplined and empathetic and drive to that direction. So that's me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really appreciate that perspective. And I appreciate that message that you give to your kids too. It's strong in me. It's even stronger in my wife, which I think is probably one of the reasons why I gravitated toward her.
Awesome. Well, thank you for asking that question. And I love, my guests asking me, so then the audience can start learning a little bit more about me, right? But thank you. So real quick, going to rapid fire questions here. What's one book do you recommend our listeners should read?
I recently read a book called Jackdaws. One word, Jackdaws by Ken Follett. And this was a fascinating historical fiction based on a real life character, a woman who was a leader in the resistance during World War II. I think she was English, but she worked with the French resistance and did this incredible work behind the lines under high pressure to lead, all these French fighters to disrupt German communication lines before D-Day, before the big attack where which really effectively, everyone could see that was going to be the end of the war. And Jackdaws follows her journey. So I found it really fascinating because I didn't know her story, and it's really interesting to actually say it out loud, having told you the story about when I was working in Paris and working with, reporting into a woman who was over a very large part of the operation. I don't know if these two things are connected, but she was such a remarkable leader, this woman who was profiled in the book, that I felt like it actually was a profile in leadership as much as you learn history and you learn how a woman navigated not just a time, but like male French dudes who, can be really, really difficult. And she did it so exceptionally that I think that's a book that a lot of people could get value from. I certainly.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. What's a daily habit that keeps you grounded?
Well, I do live here in Surfside Beach in South Carolina, so about half a mile from the ocean, which is absolutely incredible. And I certainly make every effort to take a walk and see the ocean every day. I love being outside and in nature here.
I love that. I'm jealous. I love the beach. I was actually born in Peru, 10 minutes from Lima, Peru, which is 10 minutes from the beach. Came to the States, early, but every time I get the chance in the summer to go to the beach, I love it. The sand, the sound, it's just so calming, right? I mean, that's my happy place there. Sustainability is a big thing in your life. It has been for a while. What's one thing you recommend, or one thing that we could do as individuals that you recommend?
The biggest thing that I recommend, because I think it's also the easiest thing to do, is one, recognize that where we bank, where we just park our cash, right, which is like a one-time decision and then we never think about it. Where we bank today has a big influence on the world that we're creating, because banks are loaning out that money, right, to enterprise. And almost every bank today underwrites fossil fuels. So whether you know it or not, whatever your values are, you're actually supporting the continuation of fossil fuels. There's a bank that launched a number of years ago, one of the fastest growing banks and new banks in America, just passed $1 billion in assets, FDIC insured accounts. currently good. I think they're at like 4% interest rates on maybe even personal savings and checking. It's called Climate First Bank. And they take their proceeds, their business model is to underwrite solar in communities, different kinds of projects that also have a really nice return. Move your money. I mean, that's just, it's the easiest thing to do. And then, doesn't impact your daily life, but, you'll do a lot of good, and it doesn't really take a lot of work, and it's just as safe.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So those are the questions I have. I'm just going to talk to the audience here. If this conversation resonated with you, ask you to do one thing and share this with others. We have been having a great conversation here with Josh. So it relates to sustainability, his stories, his background, and the amazing things he's doing right now, and sharing a lot of this innovation. Please share it, and we continue to grow here with this kind leader philosophy. So where can people find you, Josh?
The best place to find everything I mentioned around Supercool and the ventures I'm involved with is our website, getsuper.cool. Okay. The course I mentioned, getsuper.cool/playbook, but you'll find the podcast, newsletter, everything we're working on there. And then I tend to spend the most time on LinkedIn of all the social channels. So if anyone listening wants to connect with me directly, that would be a great place to do it. And I'd love to hear from anyone of your listeners who this resonates with.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And then what's the final thought you want to share with our audience here?
This has been, for me, I would just say thank you, an amazing conversation. I really love the theme of kind leadership. And there's more I could say on the topic, of course, because I think it's so important. So nothing else really to share, just other than thank you and appreciate the work that you're doing.
I appreciate that, Josh. Thank you very much for being part of this family now. You're part of the podcast family now, and for sharing the amazing stories. I mean, I've always learned a lot, but I really learn a lot from sustainability now. You piqued my interest, so definitely going to be signing up and understanding it a little bit better, and how I can contribute to the world at the end of the day. And for the listeners, thank you for being part of the Kind Leader podcast. Remember, be kind, bring value, rise together. Have an amazing day, everybody.